Alrighty, let us kick everything off. A warm welcome, everybody, and to everyone online. Greetings. This is wave. My name is Adam Hems, and I'm the leader of the Houston Azure User Group. Have been for the last 7 years now, I think, going on, something like that, losing track, kind of going into a blur. I know we have some new members. New folks. Okay, a few new folks. Okay, a warm welcome. And everyone else returning, welcome back. Okay. Welcome to the noobs. So for the noobs who are joining us, the intent of this group is to learn really from one another as much as possible. We have speakers from a variety of backgrounds. A lot of them are colleagues. So my day job is as a cloud architect at Microsoft, which I've been doing for the last 7 years now. So I've seen a lot of cloud journeys, and as part of that role, I get to work with lots and lots of big companies, large and small, and help them on their cloud journey to Azure. But it tends to be very one-on-one, right? I get to work just with those individuals, and then I get to work with someone else. And there's not an opportunity for the users, the customers of that technology to learn from one another, to share those experiences. I mean, because of NDAs and things like that, I can't share what other customers are doing unless there's all kinds of processes and procedures professionally, right? So it's not an easy way for folks who are actually customers of all this technology on effectively the very same journey, because that's something I've seen. The journeys are the same, pretty much, even though different businesses, different size companies, right? Different industries, very much. We have a lot of healthcare, a lot of oil and gas, obviously, here in Houston. But the journeys and the use of the technologies tends to be very similar. And so are the learnings and the pitfalls and the stub toes, right? And the things that, the pain points and the suffering and the things I wish I'd known, many of those things can be the same. So there's some things that I like to try and share with folks, but also you can't beat just learning it from one another sometimes. So that's part of one of the reasons for this group, an opportunity to learn from each other, as well as give opportunities for folks. We get students coming here as well. That's also something else that I like to encourage people looking to change careers. So I like to encourage recruiters to approach us and post open opportunities they have on the Meetup page, because often we find people are changing careers. They hear about this cloud thing, it's been around, need something new. So how can we learn about it? So looking to change roles. So I'd like to encourage that too. All things that in my professional role wouldn't make any sense. But here, as what is effectively one of my hobbies, that kind of thing makes sense and helps folks. So we're doing this for a little while. So that's really the intent of the group here, as well as get some face time, which is really nice. Everyone will be back in person. Enjoy some pizza, which incidentally tonight I was sponsored by Avanade. They're here in our building. On the 8th floor, fancy new floor. They've come down. They couldn't send anyone to represent it, but they were generous enough to cover it. So that was nice. Thank you to Avanade for helping us, supporting us on that. They fed us. So that's good. We like that. And then without further ado, we'll hand over to our speakers. So we have a returning speaker in the form of James. We can keep him here as long as you like. Last time, I think we ran nearly 3 hours because it went on. No one left. So you have to beat that one if you want, James. We'll see if he manages to make it as interesting this time. We'll see. So it's quite a high bar was set from last time. So.
I feel like you messed up inviting me back, honestly.
So this should be interesting. And Jeff, both from HCSS, you may have read the little preamble thing we got out there. But without further ado, gentlemen, awesome. The floor is yours. And for the folks online, I know you've got the cameras up. The sort of sun is sort of back here. It might be a bit hard to follow along. put questions in the chat. I'm going to moderate it.
You're gonna moderate.
Yeah, the speakers won't be. I'll interrupt them. Or if you want, you can ask questions. I've allowed folks to use their mics, so you can come yourself off mic mute if you want and ask a question. We've set it up so the speakers in the room, everyone should be able to hear you, but you probably might not be able to hear folks in the room. But we'll just try and manage that. All right. Without further ado.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you for being here today. If you can't hear me, let me know. But today it's going to be James and Jeff leading. So we figured 2 halves make a whole. So hopefully with the 2 halves, we can make a decent presentation for y'all. First thing, it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be able to present to this group because it's given so much to me, especially in my early career, that to be able to give back is an absolute pleasure. So I appreciate being here. And y'all having us. Today, our topic is HCSS, the global deployment story. It's actually a work in progress. This isn't a completed story. This is a journey. And I guess with most things, we'll talk about what we've learned along the way, and hopefully maybe y'all can learn something, or maybe I can learn something from some feedback, and we'll just learn from each other. That's the part of this group, right? So we're talking about deploying to the cloud, the DevOps way. Our personal DevOps team runs by 3 tenets, speed, agility, and security. It's just kind of the way we kind of summarize everything. With that said, we also listen to Don and Brown's definition very closely as well. But just also, when we ask a question, we always try to think about those 3 tenets when we try to solve anything that we do.
And Donovan's here in Houston. Did you know that?
Yes.
Yeah, he spoke at this event once.
That was my very first event.
Oh, really? Okay.
I was like, wow, this is the quality we have?
Yeah.
I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah. Don, he'd never been to this office, even though he lives here in Houston. So that was,
Sir.
anyway.
Can you give it the 3 tenets?
Okay, what?
You talked about the 3 tenets, like, can you?
Yeah.
The same one. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Speed, agility, this doesn't really show up very well. But speed, agility, and security is the 3 tenets we follow that we go by. Security, for example. If this working now that the thing's going? Seriously.
I tested it.
Having the clicker is super.
So
Who
are we? And why should you trust us? Short answer is you shouldn't. But if you were to, we are.
So I'm James. I'm a manager of DevOps. I'm a PowerShell advocate, big time PowerShell advocate. If you go to my GitHub, it's all PowerShell pretty much. Been in technology about 14 years in various aspects, everything from like network administration to DBA to security to now more on the developer side of things. Been doing DevOps for about 6 years in some capacity with heavy end of development. And recently referred to as a lead engineer by a publication on Meetup.com. So pretty awesome. And then I'll let Jeff take over for his slides.
Yeah. I'm Jeff Closier. I'm an information security specialist at HCSS. I've been working in technology for about 9 years now. Before that, I was a chemist, and before that, I was an auto mechanic. So changing careers is definitely a way to go. My job is to be professionally paranoid at work and bring up all the things that could go wrong. I've taken the Azure Administrator, the Azure Security, the Azure, and like 5 other Azure certifications. Sometimes they come out in the last few years and keep up to date with those. So.
Awesome.
HCSS, we make software for the heavy construction industry. So roads, bridges, pipeline type work is the software that we're making. I'm a member of InfraGard, which is the FBI industry public-private partnership. They classify, the FBI is classifying road construction, critical infrastructure, as one of their top cybersecurity worries right now. And we make software for that. We also like SQL a lot. I believe at one point we accounted for most of the SQL spend in the Houston market as far as Azure went.
Over 6,000 SQL databases in Azure.
Wow, there's a lot.
Yep. We like Azure and we like Microsoft. So.
One of my favorite quotes about the road and highways is someone had to build the Batcave.
That's why it's so important, because if you take down power and things like that, you can take down bases. You know, they have to have backups and things like that.
So we put technology in the hands of gentlemen like that out in places where I've worked with customers here in Houston that are not struggling for connectivity. I've worked with customers out in Montana that didn't have connectivity until they finished the site they were working on, put in the cell phone towers. You have to support that.
With that said, we're mostly back-end devs, so we're gonna try to sell you on a bunch of stuff because back-end devs are clearly sales.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's see what's my part. So the problem statement. Jeff, you can tell Jeff did the slides because they're all snarky. But hey, can you deploy to Germany right now? Anonymous manager. Can you just pack up everything? What would it take to put our product in another country right now? Well, that obviously comes with a lot of problems. And these are the particular constraints that we can find ourselves to. Granted, if I start with one of the lower ones like GDPR, we didn't necessarily have to do that, but we decided to start with that. So that way, when it did become a thing, we would be ready for it. The first thing is we have 25 products. So these teams, and I think it says it's usually team driven and organic. So when I first started working on this stuff, we had a blend of GitHub, Bitrise, Circle CI, Azure DevOps. We have Android, Swift, C#, .NET, .NET Framework, .NET Core.
Two different
on-prems, VDF, which is, if you haven't heard of it, that's good. That's an older language.
Language? Wow.
Yes, it's a flat file language, very popular in Europe apparently. But if you've ever worked with like old Access or anything, it's where one of those things where you have the map drive and you have the DAT files and you're doing a bunch of like file reads and writes and locking.
Has a lot of assumptions built in. Apparently, very much like the R programming. Works with that.
It does kind of look like that, yeah,
Yeah.
from a language standpoint. But still around, still a thing, big in Europe, but not, yeah, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of shared infrastructure. So 6,000 databases we spoke about. Some of those databases would have more than one product using the same database, just with different schemas on the database. So I might have something like DPO.timecards for like the time card software, but then I might have like SF.safety meetings or something, and that's like safeties. So they never touch each other's data because they're in different schemas, but they're both in the same database. So they depend on each other. So if I were to like move a database, they both have to be privy to it. Otherwise, both softwares or one of the softwares could break. Over provisioned users. Anyone have Azure footprints or handle identity access management or any of that kind of stuff? Okay. Well, a lot of times when I work with people in their cloud, the first time I go into Azure, like they're early on in their career, a lot of people get owner access to everything or they get admin access to everything because it's so much faster. But as soon as we start saying things like how we should ensure you're not taking data out of that country, it's like, well, everyone's an owner. They can undo any rule I put, so that's not going to work. So we have to figure out how to like do that and get, again, 25 teams. It's like herding cats. How do you do that? Then we had one company we had bought that was in AWS. So if we want to have some sort of global routing or some sort of global strategy where we ensure things route a certain way, we have to make sure that it's multi-cloud. Because if I use something that's just for Azure resources and only works with Azure resources, then I'm screwed. The another thing to deal with is hard-coded URLs. Let's pretend that we're going to do something like AUS for Australia dash or Austria. I think that's, I don't know which one it is. AUS dash mytimecardsoftware.com, right? Well, the problem is that all the software is hard-coded those URLs. So either all 25 teams have to now make their code smart enough to route differently between the two, or I need to put something in front of the code that makes it route between the two. So that way they don't have to change too much code. It's, you know, it's a real thing with legacy software. And then we also have the desktop software we have to account for, and that's in VDF. And yeah, there's not like, I can't use Azure App Configuration from VDF. I don't know if y'all don't have an SDK package for VDF, do you? I didn't see it in the list. Oh, okay. Then, oh, and no one on the team can tell where the entrance. That's a really long thing. What Jeff was trying to put there was is the tribal knowledge. That's a big thing, a big problem. Is sometimes when you need to figure out where everything is at, you get a bunch of people in a room, they talk through it, they diagram it out on a dry erase board, and someone takes a picture. That sound familiar at all? Anybody? Yeah, so that's a thing. So that's always fun.
Mix of dev staging and production. I don't know if anyone's dealt with that, but sometimes people will have like one resource group and put everything in there. Or like really worst case scenario, someone has like one blob storage account, but this GUID means that it's in the dev environment. This GUID is like the container for the prod environment. So splitting things up becomes really difficult as well because everyone expects it to be in one place. So they probably coded it that way. Another thing we ran across was, so I talked about the GDPR thing. That was more of a self-imposed constraint to make sure that when we did have to go with that, we could get that working. And then the really great one is we put on a rule that said no one from outside of the US is allowed to log in. And then we hired contractors from UK and Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, among other places.
So then we had to shift really quickly and we're like, oh, but those people are okay if they're at that IP address, but nobody else except that one we decided. And that's the gist of some of our problems. So as we talk through this today, just kind of, I'll keep bringing these back up. This is what we're going to be tackling is these kind of problems, but then also being global.
Curious about your shared infrastructure. You mentioned SQL databases. What else do you guys use? Is that SQL database? SQL VMs?
So we don't use a lot of VMs. Our thing is if you're using a VM in the cloud, you're probably not cloud native. We're all web apps, function apps, API management, blob storage, SQL databases. Azure Data Factory for something.
Data Factory. We've got some lift and shift VMs that have a lot of connection points to them, and a lot of communication to them.
An integration?
Yeah.
Yeah, most of our stuff though is done through Azure Web Apps, SQL backend, maybe some blob storage for file upload,
Okay.
download.
Yeah.
Very copy and paste, same infrastructure kind of setup for most of our teams, except for when you get into the Androids and the Swift and things like that.
Azure Kubernetes.
We're not really using Azure Kubernetes because we haven't had the need to bite off things like Nginx and routing and networking, those kind of things. We do have Kubernetes for our SAT code analysis SonarQube. We're hosting that in there, but for the most part, you're just using a web app from a Docker file, a Docker image or whatever, and then its scaling options seem to be enough. And we just use the Azure native routing services for stuff like that.
It was something we considered when we were talking about all of this stuff building up, but moving what existed to AKS and retraining all of our developers to think in the AKS mindset of how those things work was not on the project timeline to tackle at that point in time.
I think a fair way to put it is phase one, get Docker files working. Phase two, maybe talk about Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So right now we're at the code to web apps and some Docker files.
Who are your customers using this?
Do you think so? Heavy construction, highways, roads, bridges, anything that's horizontal, not vertical. So if it builds upwards, it's not us. If it's horizontal, you want like an actual named customer.
I mean, is it like the construction manager or somebody on the ground there with a tablet?
A little bit of everything, honestly. So we do everything from estimating software to time card software to safety software, dispatcher software, fleet management and maintenance software, telematics, telemetry, tracking your cars and assets. I mean, it goes on and on. Like we have 25 different teams, and that's not all the offerings. That's just the active development. So pretty much holistically, head to tail, we do construction. We're actually the largest construction software company out there for software.
Yep.
It's a niche market. We're about 400, 500 people thereabouts.
Yes.
We have just an office in Sugarland, and then we have a reach across we have people in Dubai, Hawaii, big in Canada and the US, a little bit in Europe.
South America.
South America, really? Huh. Or in South America?
Australia.
Your customers are in South America.
Yeah, I don't keep track of it that closely.
Yep.
Yeah, so a little bit everywhere.
Okay.
How many security people do we have here? Cool. All right. One of the first things we kind of took a look at was application security, and GDPR being part of that. And we're stretching ourselves into new regions where maybe the laws that we're used to don't apply anymore. Maybe the IP rules don't apply anymore. On top of that, we needed to find a way to get all of these disparate dev teams that are used to working on it by themselves, talking to each other, working together, and thinking about this is our thing that we're going to be using. After some discussion and some kind of back and forth, we decided Azure Front Door was a very good project to apply to our applications to bring everybody together and get them talking. It rolls a lot of things that we want to have all into one. So it's a web application firewall. One firewall that sits in front of all of our applications and it does what we need it to do. It's a global content delivery network, which allows us to host it closer to our users. So right now, if we are in the East US data center and somebody from Washington State logs in, it takes them an extra second to load our web page. With Azure Front Door, it's the same as if they were on the East Coast because it's split and hosted. Gave us a lot more monitoring, a lot more ability to see what was going on with our web app, see the error messages, where traffic was coming from, weird logins, things like that. And then important for GDPR was it gave us global routing rules. So if somebody from Germany tried to log into our application, we would send them to the Germany login portal. But if somebody from Germany just wanted to look at our product offerings, we could bring them to our US webpage to look at our product offerings. The good and the bad, putting all of our eggs in one basket like that, when there's an outage with Azure Front Door, our applications go down entirely.
A globally distributed single point of failure.
Yeah.
At least that's how we figured it out. I think the quote was, "Good friends don't let friends use newly GA software in the first year."
Yeah.
Until
So
it's code hard.
So when things happen within our control, within Microsoft control, or outside of that, and the front door service begins to not be able to resolve internally, our application take a little bit to come back up. It happens. It's one of those things that in order to support a globally distributed business, you have to lean on technology companies that are much larger than yourselves a lot of the time.
And what's great about Azure Front Door is you don't have someone walking around who's like the best expert of firewalls on the planet, then maybe firewall as a service is a great thing. It's like a Swiss Army networking tool that does most of the heavy lifting for you. And if there's new security issues that come up, Microsoft will release the fixes. They'll have these like new rules like the ISO X1234 kind of things. You just hit yes, I would like those.
By default, you get a little pop-up in the portal when you log in.
I'm curious about these outages. So what kind of impact did you guys get hit a lot for take down production for a long time, or you've had it bouncy? I mean,
We've gotten hit 3 times in the last month and a half.
is this on the standard tier of Azure Front Door?
From the
standard
new premium.
The new premium one?
Yeah, and there's this the guy from support that we spoke to said something along the lines of, yeah, you need to wait for it to get code hardened. The other one, the classic, is a little bit better.
Yeah, it's
And
an oldie, but a goodie.
Yeah.
and the
And then the classic went down this week.
Oh, okay.
and how this works is it's using CNAME. So a CNAME, if you have like my site at HCSS.com, then HCSS.com is the apex domain, that's the root domain. The CNAME, you can take the HCSS.com and point it to like AzureWebsites.net. But instead of doing that, you shift it over to the Azure Front Door endpoint, and then it'll route everything without using hard-coded IP addresses or anything like that. So when there is an outage, I have to jump into all my DNS hosted zones and flip everything back to like the Azure websites directly one. And I'm like, okay, now we're cut back over and we're back up. Outage over for us at least. But we can't do that once we become global. So we're kind of waiting to see if this stabilizes a little.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Are you using the Microsoft firewall or some proprietary firewall?
Azure Front Door is Microsoft offering.
It builds everything together.
Yeah, so it's got the intrusion prevention, it's got the firewall rules, it has the DDoS, anti-SQL injection, and all that kind of stuff. So, and there's a little bit to be done with like configuring it, because sometimes developers write code that looks like SQL injection, not SQL.
especially in the dev environment.
especially in the dev environment.
Why doesn't this part work? Because I'm getting
I get a lot of code comments. I'm trying to make it readable. Okay.
Yeah. I'm getting alerts that somebody's trying to inject on our
There's
thing. I'm
two
like,
dashes in the SQL query.
Yeah.
This is bad. Don't you?
go check the PR, and it's like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. Did you want to talk about managers?
Yeah, just briefly, because it leads into something we're going to talk about a little bit later. So management groups, does anyone not know what management groups are? Perfect. Okay, now I'm looking down to my.
I don't know.
Not a clue. Management groups, so you have your root tenant. So it's like our company's HCSS, that's the root tenant that sits above everything. If you want to think of it as file folders, that's how I like to think of everything. Inside of it.
Linux.
I don't hate Linux. I was actually telling, I was like, this is going to be the most monumental Microsoft demo. I'm going to use VS Code on Windows instead of a Mac, building Java or whatever the heck they might be doing. But so management groups are just a logical grouping container. But then inside of it, you can either put another management group, or you can put a subscription. And then inside of subscriptions, you have to put the smaller unit, which is resource groups, and then and only then you can use resources. What's nice about that is just like setting permissions or rules at a folder level that you can then propagate it down and control whole groups of things. Like, for example, in my case, I have a management group called the HCSS Global, which then has each country, and I can do country-specific subscription rules, or I could do overarching policies at the management group level that then impacts all the child subscription objects. So
As a 50-year-long developer, every time I hear the word policy, I cringe.
that's fair. That's fair.
No,
Our
yeah.
first rollout of the policy was horrendous, so, but we'll cover that. It's a lot better now. A lot of lessons learned.
Cool. So there's been a lot of really cool features released in the last year and a half. One of those being Active Directory dynamic groups. These allow you to define some rules in a Azure Active Directory group, and it evaluates those rules against your entire directory tenant every so often. Everybody that meets those rules gets added to the group. Everybody that doesn't meet those rules cannot be added to that group. There's some limitations on it, like you need to have the specific fields. A lot of them from your profile page, your name, your email address, your direct supervisor, your department, your company, things like that. The reporting supervisor field is an all or nothing. So if I say everybody that reports to James that's named Jeff, it will still put Austin and Jared in there from our team, because everybody that reports to James, regardless of every other rule, gets thrown in there. And then Azure AD is the source of truth. So if you're using something else for your identity management, you need to force what you're making rules off of into Azure Active Directory, and then make your rules from there. The solution we came up with was there are 15 extension properties in your Active Directory domain that get synced to Azure Active Directory, and you can put whatever you want in there. So I wrote some PowerShell scripts and some other things. I'm pulling some information out of various places, compiling it all, and then putting it into our Active Directory to make our users fit the schema that I have in my head to allow that. So what you end up having is something like this, where for my testing group, my department equals the development group, my company name is not contractors or interns, and my extension attribute 3 happens to be the product that they work on is safety. It puts that all into a pretty standard query, pesto-esque query language.
I think it looks like PowerShell, if you ask me. Dash contains,
Dash contains,
dash EQ.
little bit of graph, a little bit of PowerShell, a little bit of pesto. It's all similar syntax. And now I can take this, obviously it's test group. I can take this group and I can say, these are the people at my company that I am allowing to work on my production safety application for our users. And no matter what somebody else comes in here and does, they will not be able to add an intern to that. They will not be able to add a contractor to that. Only people that work for my company will be allowed into this group. And I don't have to go update it when we bring something new on. As soon as their department and product are updated, they're brought into that group automatically. They're provisioned automatically.
Downside, support people moving teams.
No, the downside is if you have people moving teams and you've got a lag there.
HR could be the downside because if they don't update the docs fast enough, then they don't get the access they need.
Update the properties of the account in Azure Active Directory via your internal processes. Until that's done, this doesn't work.
He's been working in this other team for 2 weeks now and can't get access to things. Like, talk to HR.
And it's one of those things where it helps to kind of shift the back pressure into a particular place and be like, okay, now we need to step in and say, what can we do to help you with this backlog of things? Can we automate stuff? Can we give this into a group, HR, that we normally wouldn't have a whole lot of interaction with other than day-to-day niceties because we were in a single office, single campus.
I need to interrupt with a quick question
Yeah.
before we move on. See, Andrew had a question.
Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Andrew.
Oh, actually, Andrew, I think Peter answered it.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter. Okay,
We good?
you good?
Yeah.
Cool. Side channel to that is Azure's conditional access policy. With this, I can go in and do a lot of sculpting of how people are allowed to access my resources. I can define everybody in my tenant has to use MFA. I don't care if you're a guest that you got invited for one Teams call. You now have to use MFA when you touch my stuff. There's a very good researcher out of Australia that can show you how your guests on Teams can iterate through the groups in your Azure Active Directory and start generating lists of names that you might have.
Is it Troy Hunt?
No.
Oh,
No,
okay.
it's not
Didn't see that coming.
I can say locations. People from the Czech Republic are allowed. People from Slovakia are not. And it's checkboxes. So when we have something globally, global conscious shifting happen in a normally very cold region of the world that goes on for 8 months longer than anybody thought it would. And a large part of that has been a cyber war on top of everything else that's going on. We can just say we're not allowed traffic from that area right now. Also, very good article on how Microsoft's been responding to that in their blogs.
Yeah. I'll also add, this helps kind of frame the picture. We're slowly talking developers. We got developers. First off, developers. All right, sorry. Sorry. That gives my age away. You know what generic classes are? We're trying to herd cats here. So we talked about the 25 different teams. So everything, the story we're kind of telling is slowly tightening that band in a way that it is rule-based and codified, and it doesn't require a ton of manual intervention. So this is what we're slowly working towards. So if that helps frame as we talk through these things. Ready for the next?
And it also cuts down on people saying, well, Jeff is keeping me from doing stuff. So the policies have been defined. Everybody's agreed to this. What's blocking this?
We can reopen the policy and talk about it.
We can negotiate the policy, absolutely. So the red highlights here are something, if you're going to roll this out soon, when you first out your MFA, you're going to be inclined to say MFA for everybody except for like 5 people. 1 second. And grant them access if they're from these locations and exclude everything else. What's going to end up happening is all those exclusions are going to be excluded from needing MFA. So the first policy to write is if you don't have MFA, you don't get to log in. And then you define where everything else comes in from that. Just sorry.
So are you using this, like the users of the?
So
I can absolutely use this with the user applications, especially for internal applications. For our end users, those construction people, they've got their own identity portal that doesn't touch. So,
This is for your internal dev teams and the folks building your solutions.
Yep.
Yeah, we have to ensure that people don't accidentally steal data from another country.
Yeah.
Oops.
How has this changed then, given the shift of what you're saying this country or something? How does that go about this?
So that's a policy decision, and not a Azure policy decision, but a corporate policy decision of what is your HR and your stakeholders, what are they saying is okay? Are they saying that you have to be within an hour drive of your office here in Houston? Okay, then we just set your location to Texas and maybe Louisiana to drive real fast. If we're saying we're going to be a little bit more permissive, go. It's 1,000 degrees here in the summer. Go visit family in Washington State and Michigan. Okay, location United States, but we don't have any developers in Europe. We don't have any developers in Mexico. No, not allowed. And then what we've done is, as people say that they're going to visit family in the UK or take a 5-week vacation in the Czech Republic, or become a digital nomad and move around every couple weeks. Here's how you get us the information that you're going to be somewhere weird, and we update that. As long as, and our thing is like from your manager, a shared management between the two of us, we'll make it happen. And as soon as I flip that switch, like go make a cup of coffee, it'll propagate and you'll be able to. From Keith. That's where you're at.
Geographical location.
So,
So if one Mexico.
So I can allow Mexico, or I can say, what is the IP address you're going to be at? What is the city you're going to be in?
Or use
Something like that.
VPN.
Well, that was my other question.
Or I can say that any of your work stuff needs to come through our VPN, and then I can set up our VPN to allow those different places to come in and block everybody else.
Just say actually everybody else.
Yeah, but depending on your workload, it can become unscalable because if you have 500 users hitting one networking appliance through VPN, it's like.
And if you've got SSO across the board for everything, like my sales team logging into their customer tracking software, there's a lot of important data in there, but I'm not going to make them get on VPN every time. If they're on a Mediterranean cruise and they're going to be in Greece and Turkey and wherever else, I'm just going to, okay, that lasts for 2 weeks. You are allowed from those places for 2 weeks, and we get rid of that.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty impressed with the way he set it up. It gets increasingly more punitive the farther away from the office you get. So if you're in office, there is an MFA if you're on campus. But if you're off campus, then MFA shows up.
There's once a week.
Once a week? Oh. Well, he'll know. But I just know that it gets really rough the farther away you get.
And then there's also fun as you go into Azure P1 and P2 for your Active Directory, there's risky users. I can set up a policy that says if you trigger a risk alert at medium or higher, I'm going to make you re-MFA. I don't care where you're at. You have to re-MFA now before I'll let you do anything else. You do that 3 times in 1 day to me, IT is just going to change password. So, any other questions? Anybody online?
There's a few people online. I don't know about questions. But I don't know.
Yeah.
This is why the first few slides are stuck. He had to edit them on the way here. If you're starting out with this stuff fresh and want to get a good place, when the slide deck goes out, that link will take you to this page that says, I want to select the template, and I would go with require multi-factor authentication for all administrators and require multi-factor authentication for risky sign-ins. I would choose those two, and I would set them in report only for the first week.
Always report.
And then you can go into the logs, see who's been tripping that, see why it was tripped. And work your way backwards to if that was actually something that you needed to shut down. And how we need to have an educational moment with that particular user. Or if your rules were too punitive and you need to be nicer to your fellow coworkers. Yeah, that's me. My first set of rules, like, yeah, nobody like.
One of his first rules was you couldn't do anything unless it had these 3 tags on it. And he accidentally put all instead of index, which means all resources, even ones that are not taggable. So, and some of the screens, like adding alerts, didn't even have a thing for adding tags.
You're talking about Azure tags?
Yeah, Azure tags, yeah.
I figured out how to get the tags onto there, and then I just like shrugged my shoulders, so.
We do have a question, I'm not sure. Yeah, okay. If a user gets let go from one of the construction service providers and is updated in their AAD instance, does that propagate to the HCSS AAD and dynamic groups and disable the user on your systems?
So that integration doesn't exist right now. If they are part of, let's say somebody works as a consultant for us or is using the Azure Active Directory guest user to log into our thing. So they're logging in with them at theircompany.com, redirecting to their authentication method, however it is, and then coming in to do work for us. Because we're sending over to them and asking them, is this person okay? As soon as they're offboarded on their side, their logins for us will stop working. That exists on that particular customer or that particular partner.
Yeah, and if you're using Azure Active Directory as a customer, then our identity platform just reflects back into their Active Directory. So if they let it go, they're gone.
We've kind of touched on this a little bit, and I swear I'm bringing this all together. I know I seem really scatterbrained right now. So location-based access is that routing control that we were talking about earlier. Based on things, we can base it on IP address. There's really good lists of IP addresses out there. They get published every week. We see a ton of spam. Microsoft publishes like 2 of them. We see a ton of spam, a ton of attacks coming from these locations, these IP addresses. Blocklist them. You can do it that way. That's cool. You have to update it. Probably worth having an intern do that like once a week. You can do geolocation. You can say, I'm just not letting traffic from Russia, Turkey, places where we don't do business. I'm not letting it come into my environment. If we hit a problem there, it will come through management channels, it will come through the HR system, and we will figure that out and get that person a specific role. You can also play with, there we go, header information and rate of connection. So you can say, if your header has Yandex in it, which Yandex is Russia's primary web crawler, Yandex bots generally we see a Yandex bot crawl, and then right behind it we see like 4 or 5 attempts to log in, and then it moves on to the next thing. What we've seen, so we just decided we're not doing business on Russian IP space. We're not going to let Yandex crawl our stuff. You could do the same thing with Google. Throw off your search results and drive your marketing team crazy, but it could. Or rate of connection. If you're connecting to my site faster than I think the average construction foreman can type in and hit enter, I'm just going to say no. If you're connecting to my site 30 times a minute, I'm going to say no. You can wait, put you on progressive cooldowns.
So this is all features of
This is all
Azure
features
front door.
of the Azure front door. All of this with one offering in minimal configuration, that if you're by yourself and you've got 25 different products to configure, you can get it configured in less than 2 days.
Yeah, the geolocation is important. I don't know if you covered it on the later slide, but the geolocation is important because if I have Australia timecardsoftware.com and then US software.com, it just figures what location you're at and then routes you to the correct website. Meaning desktop apps didn't have to update the hard-coded URLs. Your Android, iOS didn't have to update the URLs. We found a location where we can inject before we get to the device DNS and use some tricky little CNAME magic, and boom, you're up and running. A little trickier with Apex domains. You have to do a thing called an A name. That's a whole nother thing. Stick to CNAMEs if you can avoid it.
Yeah. Was there an online question?
Currently,
Okay, cool.
no.
Access monitoring. This comes back to testing my assumptions and putting everything in a report mode first. Log analytics is your friend. Put cost of.
You paid us to say that, by the way.
Put a cost limit on your Azure your log analytics workspaces, because you can quickly ingest a lot more logs than you think they are. But if you're ingesting just your authentication logs, it's really less than a gigabyte per day, which is less than $2 per day for what you're ingesting. You can blow that up pretty quickly with some other things. 6,000 SQL databases and all the SQL queries and all of that dumped to one workspace. My boss was very angry with me before he was my boss. But
$5,000 one day.
Yeah, for log analytics.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll add up.
I spent quite, I spent like close to like 40 grand that month.
Yeah, you're not the first. It's not the first time that's happened.
Yeah.
We like that. We make the money off that.
It's a learning experience, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
$40,000 education.
Look at that.
Yeah, that's right.
Turned it off, wrote a script, went and set every log analytics workspace in our domain to have a 5 gig cap on it for the day.
Yeah, the other thing you can do is with log analytics. So there's a standard tier of log analytics data that costs much less to ingest. So certain logs, instead of having the analytics capability, you can have them come in as standard. You can't do as much Custo against it, so it's simpler. But that is a good way if you have simpler needs of certain data to reduce. But it's specific to certain tables in your log analytics.
Okay.
It's not the whole workspace like you were doing. Particular tables, you can configure those to be cheaper.
Into that.
Yeah.
And then I just did a very simple sign in logs where my location isn't from the US, give me some information on that user and check my assumption. Am I seeing people that I don't expect to be logging in? Coming from other places?
Slides back.
So,
This is actually access is.
this conditional access is security within Azure Active Directory. Yeah. But we're leveraging that plus a bunch of other stuff in our front door. Yeah.
Yeah, the goal is to secure.
Integrating Azure AD with the front.
Yeah, and throwing all my logs together.
Yeah, our goal is to secure our apps regionally speaking. So the Azure front door handles the routing side of things, but then the conditional access is going to handle keeping the good guys supposedly out of stuff they shouldn't be seeing. Like our developers, maybe they shouldn't touch that thing from US and then pull Germany data accidentally over to their computer. We can then tackle it from both sides with that.
But yeah, run that query, see what.
Yeah, so there is a Germany data, and you have like the user Germany data.
So,
On the SQL.
yeah, so Germany has some of the toughest rules around PII. So even if my employer is based out of Germany, they start putting my information into cloud hosted software, and my data comes to the US, I can sue the hosting provider for letting my data leave Germany. And those fines start at fund numbers like $10 million or 2% of revenue,
Something
whichever
absurd.
is higher.
Yeah, and then the next question.
Yeah, even that, because working for that company, they have my name, they have my address, they have probably my social security number, or government recognized ID number, my phone number, all of that stuff. If they export it to the US and the US data center gets breached because the laws aren't as strict,
Germany is really aggressive in case.
Yeah, and what was it? The other thing that happens a lot is when you bring that up, then usually there's that one developer who's going to say something like, well, what if you got a company that's global wide and then they want to get into their data into Germany? I'm like, their problem. Round V1, it's their problem. I was like, Germany says the data can't leave. So I'm going to do what Germany told me to do. You talk to Germany and you work it out.
Yeah.
Because until then, VPN, I don't know, trick it somehow. Somehow go around, and that's between you and Germany.
Yeah, so, and obviously we could work on what we could provide. Coming against that, but that's in the future and we're not worried about that today.
Yeah, our plan was after we had this kind of in place is to get an absolute expert lawyer who doesn't just do any type of law, but this law exactly. And was like, hey, can you just go through a fine tooth comb on all of this real quick and make sure we're above board? But this is just a V1 like proof of concept we were working on. So we're not in the legal waters yet.
Yeah. So I ran that query just because we're getting pretty regular. So I know who this is in Dubai. I know who this is in San Luis Potosi, and some of these other people. But we're getting a lot of interesting traffic from Ukraine, Armenia, and Russia. We have no business footprint in any of those countries. So this is somebody coming around, finding things and knocking on our doors, trying to get in.
Yeah, writing alerts for failed logins is generally a bad idea. You don't get too many alerts. But if it's like maybe 10,000 attempts at something, I told them I was like, I'm more interested in successful logins for places. If that happens now, I'm upset.
So question. So what you're showing here, you're doing Kusto query and log analytics against the data from your Azure Active Directory.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I'm using this to inform my decisions that I'm making on my Azure front door about where my traffic's going, where it's coming from, where I expect things to be happening, and any countries that I need to put more controls around to feel better when his boss's boss comes and asks me what we're doing.
And you mentioned on the previous slide alerting. So,
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So I cut it off, but if you go, there's a button right here at the very top that says new alert rule. If I take that, I click that button, it automatically creates a new Azure alert. I can say for ours, we just send it to our ticketing system. So the first person that becomes available grabs it and says, hey, this person with a ton of access just had 5 failed logins from Russia. And once again, we work in a small office down in Sugar Land. That person probably works right down the hall from me, and I can probably see them from where I'm sitting or having our morning stand up when we go over those.
And this is not a technology advice, this is a people advice. If you're going to go have that talk with the person, start off the conversation with your account's safe, everything's good. If you start off with someone from Russia's attacking your account, they're like, oh my God, do I gotta change my password? No, they didn't log in, so it's good, it's working.
And then it facilitates the training of, did you get an MFA prompt at 2 o'clock last night? Oh, okay, then don't worry about it. You just walk away, and they look stressed the rest of the day. Highly recommend doing it to the VP over your department.
Isn't Kettle on the call?
Huh?
Isn't he on the call list?
Oh, I did that to Chris.
Oh, you did the Chris? He's COO, man.
He wasn't at the time. No. Anyway, so bringing all of that together, between something controlling where my traffic comes from for HCSS users, and something that controls how my users get provisioned, being HCSS developers and stuff like that, I can create something that on your first day, provided everybody's done their paperwork appropriately, gives you access to the resources that you need in Azure Portal, AWS and GCP if you're working there, Azure DevOps and GitHub, Jira, our VPN, MFA, your location control, Office applications, our internal applications, ties all that together, and then when you try and do your job, have that ready to go. On top of that, we're wrapping all of our applications in Azure Firewall or Azure Front Door, which makes me very sure that whatever they write, even if say there are things that are problematic to make it through the QA process and all that stuff before the security team gets a good look at it. We've got more things wrapped around it. We've got more alerting wrapped around it. I'm going to get some kind of notification that something's going on, and I can tie all of those logs back together. Say, I need to talk to this developer, I need to talk to this manager, I need to talk to this person, or in an extreme case, I need to shut this down until we figure it out. And as a security person, it's very nice to have that power because it's not very common in the industry to be able to say, I'm turning off this application because something's so goofy that I don't like it.
We had that happen the other day. Someone was visiting Pakistan, and I think the internet went out where he was at, so he connected to something else, which was, I guess, on a pole that went way down across the country. And so he basically traveled way too much distance in a short amount of time. So
1,700 kilometers in 4 seconds.
So we reached out to him, but it was nighttime. He was probably sleeping or something. And we're like, well, if he doesn't respond in 24 hours, we're shutting it down. Right now, it's only one login and it's not even active. So
This is one of your employees.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
but development management
Okay.
person. So we didn't want to shut it down. So it wasn't suspicious in the sense that
It was weird.
but not weird enough.
Right.
So I created an alert, gave it a text message number. I'm like, if he logs in again and whatever, like, I'm just shutting him off. And because of all of this, they're like, yeah, go for it.
But yeah, with that said, I think telemetry is kind of the final step in that cycle of, because it was even a Donovan Brown talk that he did where he was saying that we don't close tickets, I'm paraphrasing, we don't close the user story until we have telemetry back on the thing we implemented. So what we're trying to do is we have a thing we think is going to do something, then we create the thing we think is going to do something, and then we get the telemetry back on the thing and go, all right, it's working. Because otherwise, like he gave the cautionary tale of the first rule was the one where you have to say the very first rule is block all that's not using MFA, then do the exception rules. Otherwise, we would have seen people successfully logging in from places. And the telemetry would be the way you find that out, right? Or through testing, that kind of stuff. So this means we're doing
This is the end of a lot of slides and moving into a demo section. So if you have any questions on this stuff,
Yeah.
Curious how you did the cross cloud.
The cross class.
Wait.
Oh,
Did you use?
it was so subtle the way I said it. You know, you're right. So the thing is similar to the desktop apps, like the BDF desktop apps. I can't really get into their code, so I need to get there before you get to the code. So DNS happens before that. So Azure Front Door, you can take the CNAME, so my website .hcss.com, and say, which in this case is an AWS URL. Originally, it was my proprietary domain points to an AWS endpoint website. Kind of like you would do, my website points to azurewebsites.net, and that's how you get your custom host names assigned to a web app. What you do is instead of pointing it to that, you point it to Azure Front Door first, and then Azure Front Door's backend pool is pointed to the AWS endpoint. So now you have this intersection. It's kind of like dependency injection,
Right, that
but
makes
with
sense.
DNS.
I thought it was more granular than that. You were actually controlling specific RBAC inside of AWS via Azure AD.
So specifically on
do that
the URL routes,
Yeah.
it's all URL funds. But yeah, so, and then Azure Front Door knows where you're at globally speaking. So we just need to make sure we have a global region in that country for AWS that it then routes to that one based on the global routing rules.
and for the Azure Active Directory card, we can take groups in Azure Active Directory and assign them access to our SSO for AWS. So our developers logging in through Microsoft get access to their resources in AWS, and those groups are one-to-one.
With that said, the AWS one was kind of we kind of kept it in scope, but slightly out of scope.
Yeah.
It was kind of like, we'll get to that last part about developer access to resources through identity access management. We do have single sign-on through Azure Active Directory and AWS, but as far as like actual individual controls, not so much. What we found effective, I'm not sure if what I did in Azure was separate subscriptions, and we started with a brand new one where it's like no one gets access. And we started deploying that, so it makes it easy to not mess up as easily because no one gets owner access, and we just don't let anyone get access to it. It's basically the way around it, and no one gets tenant level access to change that. without going through some sort of ticketing system or change management. And that way, we're actually a SOC 2 compliant company. So any type of access changes we have to track, and we have to go through a board and all that kind of stuff, if it's especially for production level resources.
Yep.
And we considered, and the deployment strategy was like dev, staging, production. Some country, because people are like, well, what about the dev and staging in that country? I'm like, well, why? You already had dev and staging. It's going to run the same over there. It's going to run over here. Like these are all treated as prod. But you can still do tiered releases and just release to a country, and then find out there is actually some sort of regional problem, like you forgot to do localization incorrectly or something, but highly unlikely. And we would address that as needed if it came up.
A question on that one. So what kind of access do you guys give to the devs and the folks that are building your applications to the Azure portal?
Azure portal, so we're in the process of scaling it back, and moving towards more thinking about things, infrastructure as code, and having not so many button clicks in the portal that we have to come back through and check with ARM templates and bicep later. With that said, a lot of our senior developers have at least owner over their resource groups.
Is it owner or contributor?
I am rolling the new people. The new people are coming in as contributors when they're going to be working on something new. Pulling out that owner. There's no difference in a resource group between owner and contributor, except for the fact that you can change the permissions on that. And I don't want them doing that anymore. So by pulling that down, they can still go into the portal, spin up a new what have you, and all through the clicks and stuff like that. Then when we notice it on the change order list, we have to go in and be like, okay, is this properly configured? A lot of that configuration, especially if it's customer facing, is taken care of because did you put it behind your front door? Yes. Cool. My WAF is in place. My access control is in place. My traffic shaping is in place. I don't have to worry about your special exception here. I just need to go in and make sure a few of my chosen toggles are set.
And so how do you ensure that whatever resource, web app, or whatever it is behind the Azure front door? How do you govern that?
We are not to a place where we are being punitive if they are not.
Yeah, we're in the migration process, but what we're looking to do in the future, and I was going to cover some of the demos, but
Okay.
What we're trying to do now is we're trying to move towards a thing where we do an observe and report Azure policy or initiative that tracks something that we want to track. It could be anything that an ARM resource can see. And once we start tracking it, get it to 100%, we then turn it to enforce, and we provide things like ARM or infrastructure bicep templates, things like that. Or we try to also address how can I make it as little lines of code for a developer to get to that point as possible. But the tracking is going to be very important in doing that. And Azure policy is a great control plane for all it. The other thing I was going to say is, so in dev, this comes up a lot. In dev, we give pretty much Wild West access. Anyone can have access wherever they need. In prod, we're not trying to give so much access. And people will say, well, what if this contractor or this person needs to look at how it's configured? I'm like, well, if you're using a pipeline, it has access to do all that. You just have to go through the checks and balances. And if everything's truly idempotent and you did it correctly, what happens in dev should be the same when you go to prod, right? Like if you're following the release strategies properly and you're doing everything properly, then you're good.
How do you handle load testing type of scenario? Because sometimes you can't really test capacity so you make it live.
Sure.
Your system down.
Yeah, true. Yeah, true. So we're doing a lot of our end-to-end and load testing through a thing called, we're doing Playwright for a lot of that stuff. And then load testing, we can do it through App Insights offers a load testing service. Then there's I think I'd have to talk to our QI team. We have a team that specializes in just that. That's their core focus, is running the different types of end-to-end tests and the load tests and the soap tests, and then the developers handle the unit tests, of course. But we used to use a thing called RenRec. I wouldn't recommend it. It's garbage. The App Insights one seems pretty good. And I think we're doing something with Playwright, but it's usually handled in the pipeline.
We've also got the benefit of work that our end users do is cyclical, very repetitive, and has very clear peaks and valleys, and then grows at a pretty steady pace. So we can look at last year's, today, and project out very easily that they're going to add another. They grew 30% last year to this year. It's going to grow 30% this year to next year, and then our QI team can make that scale and get everything there.
I know the perfect way to say this. All right, anyone driven on a road that was under construction? Would you say that the project moves really fast? Okay, that's the answer.
Billy, anyway, I just would like to ask you, so you put it all together for this year, it's just about security action rate, right? Verify everything, but just zero trust and action rate, right?
Sorry, what's that last?
Zero trust and action rate.
Oh, breach?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Definitely. Also, I have trust.
Yes. I don't trust myself at all.
So what you need tonight? Very good review for me.
Oh, thanks. Awesome. Well, it's about to get really good because we're going into demo phase now. We said it was gonna be a demo fest, and we hit you with slides. That was actually to try to really nail it.
It's really hard to demo
Thank you
the
very
security.
much.
Our absolute pleasure. This is a lot of fun for us. So the first thing I'm going to say before we get too into the demos, if you would like to see the demos afterwards, my GitHub is jkearns, and you can follow along with a lot of the stuff. There's an Azure user group, Globalization, so I posted up most of the files. There's a couple files I have that aren't going to get posted up there because they have some proprietary stuff hidden in them. But for the most part, you'll find all that there. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, shoot, that's the other stuff. So you click into here. I was nice enough to, if you use dev containers, I went ahead and did that for you. Or if you just want to hit dot and you're not using dev containers.
What's a dev container?
What's a dev container? That's amazing. So I created a Docker file that explains the type of things you need installed to get your developer environment working for you to then consume this code. This is not how you do it. This is because I don't have it set up. But what it'll let you do is it'll basically spin up, I think, an Ubuntu box with all the .NET stuff, the PowerShell stuff you need. It'll install the Azure PowerShell modules for you, and then the Azure Bicep. And then you should be able to just open up VS Code and connect to this this Docker container image that's running and off to the races. Drawback is running inside of, if you're doing a container on your computer, then you've got limited resources. But if you're doing what do they call them now, GitHub workspaces, keep changing it. You can give it, you can have certain, you can say it has 16 CPU cores and stuff like that. I'm a cheapskate, I don't have that set up right now. But if you wanted to, you could. Or you can just clone it down and just install the stuff you need. Because if, actually, here you go. If you go to that thing, I actually have a README right there that has all the docs and installs. And the ones that say docs actually take you to the spot that says how to get started, because it's just a little bit more than just installing a lot of the times. So we're going to cover like Azure PowerShell, VS Code. We're going to be in VS Code. There's going to be Azure Bicep. We're going to talk about Azure Container Registry, Azure Policy extensions in VS Code, and a little bit of Azure Management Group. So we've got a fun little thing ahead of us. So that brings us here. Before I get too ahead of myself, who has never really heard about do I need to do the value prop of what infrastructure as code brings to the table? No,
Maybe one sentence.
One sentence. The great part about infrastructure as code is that it's idempotent. So think of a cookie cutter. It cuts it the same way every single time. So we talked about tribal knowledge being a problem, where you had to get a bunch of people into one room to map out your infrastructure. Well, this is just basically a blueprint. I have a blueprint here that maps out my infrastructure, and I actually can go up here to the top right and tell this blueprint to then give me what my infrastructure is. So it actually shows how everything's dependent on it. So you're done. This thing creates the infrastructure and it diagrams it for you. It's self-diagramming.
I hate the word self-documenting, but self-diagramming works just fine for me. So this will give you the ability to spin up your infrastructure over and over and over again and answer that question, how do I deploy to Germany in seconds? At least the infrastructure, if we get this working right, then we're good. It's not that simple, we'll find. For example, if you have shared infrastructure, like I have this one blob storage that everyone's using, who tracks that? Whose template does that go in? There are some things you have to figure out. You kind of have to sometimes like untangle the wad of headphones that came out of your pocket. So that is one of the uphill challenges. So I was planning on walking through the basic infrastructure as code things and then kind of building on that each time. So this one's just the real basic infrastructure as code template, where the first thing I do in this deploy.bicep is target a bicep. Oh man, we're really gonna okay. Azure Bicep is a language that allows you to write infrastructure as code in a simple way, which actually end of day turns into an ARM template, which stands for Azure Resource Manager, which is the language needed to then talk to resources and control resources in Azure. I believe Mark Rusinovich headed that one, and he was like, man, this coding in JSON is awesome. And Jeffrey Snover from PowerShell inventor guy was like, you sure? People don't like developing in JSON. Apparently, I've learned that adoption was really low when I told people they had to code in JSON. Not a big fan. So this one is more like TypeScript, C#-esque. So I find developers tend to flock to this a little bit better. And the IntelliSense is really good. So like if I start saying target, it already knows I'm saying target scope equals, and then it's already got that for me. So target scope is kind of like change directories. So I'm changing directory to subscription level. So at that point, all I can create is resource groups for the most part. Yes, sir. Gotcha. I am using Bicep because I like Bicep and I don't like Terraform because there's password files and stuff left around. However, this is a multi-team project. I'm not the only one on this project. It's a whole company-wide initiative. So the people over there are using Terraform. However, for the Azure side stuff, because I would say there's only one team and it's not really like our core income. It's just a small team that handles that. It's I need to think about the 99 versus 1%, and most of us are in Azure. So if I could just get them to adopt it, we're good. But yeah, if I was over in if I was in AWS, I would definitely use Terraform or CloudFormation any day.
Hey, James.
Yes, sir.
I say to replace your ARM template.
Yes.
So yeah, so it's actually like a transpiler similar to TypeScript. So TypeScript becomes JavaScript when you compile it. ARM, this becomes ARM after it compiles. This is just to make it more user-friendly. So I would say, I don't know what Microsoft's official position on this, but I think all the usability stuff is going towards Bicep, but the actual functionality is staying ARM because they're in too deep with the JSON. Does that sound accurate? Close?
Yeah, Bicep's the new kid on the block. Use that.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing that's valuable about, I don't know if this is still true, but when I first looked at it, the reason I like to use the native solution, the reason I like to use the native solution is because you get access to the APIs faster. Typically with wrapper languages, you have to wait a little bit longer. I don't know if they fixed that or anything, but okay. Wrapper languages, so if a new thing comes out, you're sitting waiting until they catch up.
You have to pull a lot of stuff out of ARM and figure out how to do it in when we first.
I'll show you this.
Bicep first.
CDK? What's CDK?
That's AWS Cloud Development.
Oh, I know CloudFormation, I thought was their language. I've seen it.
It's, I don't remember it as one. Basically, it's the same as Bicep, except you're like, you're writing it up.
Oh, okay. I'm not aware of that. I'll have to look into that.
There are SDKs in C# that you can wrap, that wrap the Azure APIs in. So it's possible. I've worked with customers and developers who have built custom applications that wrap the API in order to a button, a human clicks and a VM gets created. Terrible idea. Don't do that.
Yeah. Learn how to do things with ARM and be creative with how you pipeline.
Or bicep. So what's neat about this is you can, target scope is saying I want to target the subscription. The basic layout of a template is you have your scope, you have parameters, which are just defined as things that you don't know until runtime. So user inputs are things that are overridable. If you want to suggest something, like maybe you should only use an S1 or a P1, V2 or whatever we're recommending right now. And then, but you can change it if you need to. You can do a default value. So that's where this stuff comes in. So like this parameter region, where it's going to default to East US, but right now we're allowing people to do Canada East, and I made that one up. I don't even know if that's right. I just threw that in there because I talked about Australia in this, so I was like, well, I better put Australia as one. And we're allowing people to only say dev, staging, or prod right now. But I definitely need to know the environment. I don't know if this is dev, staging, or prod, because at runtime, it could be any of them. And then this is actually not anything, but this is just a trick I use. This is something I personally like, because when you do a deployment to Azure, originally you could deploy with the same name twice, but the deployment name was like get first or default, so it would overwrite the one that was last deployed, and you could never find it. And so if you had a stalled out deployment just still running, you wouldn't know it because it would say the other one's done. So they finally made it primary key violation, like this is already name's already used. So how do you make it unique? And the other thing is when you deploy to a subscription, you can go to deployments and see the deployment. But then if it changes scopes and deploys to resource groups, now you got more deployments elsewhere, but it's kind of like a NoSQL type thing. So there's not a relation. So how do I build a relation? Oh, wait, if I had a GUID that's kind of like an ID for this deployment, I just slap that sucker everywhere it deploys. And now it's a unique name every single time. And also I can correlate them back to the same deployment, no matter if I'm switching between resource groups or subscriptions. So that's a little hack trick I like. Not saying you have to use it, just something I like to do. Another trick that I think is really super neat. So this is the var. So the parameter are runtime things. Vars, I personally like to use them as the business logic end of things. So you gave me your environment inputs, but I know that my web app, I want it to be all lowercase, and I want the naming convention to be environment dash company dash Houston Tech Talk or Houston Talk or something like that, right? And that's going to be the name of my web app. This thing allows me to read up a constants file. So if you want to think of that as like your app settings.config or something, or .json, something like that, you can create a folder called shared. Throw a couple constants in there, the things that never change. And then in their IntelliSense is just amazing. I just love the IntelliSense. So like right here, if I say config, and turn my caps lock off, I'll just tab complete that, dot. It actively read up the file and did that. I didn't tell it to do anything. It's just because I have that text up above saying you're going to get this value from a JSON file. And it knocks it out. So I'm loading up my tags. I got a couple tags there. Then the keyword resource is where the business end of this template gets work done. It's going to actually create the resource. So this is a resource. I named it resource group. Don't do that. It's a key name and they're not going to get angry at you. So that's actually, anyone ever run into like namespace issues where you wrote a console app and called it console, and then you try to do console.writeLine. It's like, whoa, is this the namespace or actual system.console? I'm going to need you to get that ambiguity handled. So I actually did this in my mind incorrectly, intentionally, just kind of show things off. But for example, if I were to say like resource group, like I might want to do something like, oh, wait, why can't I see resource group.tags? That's because up above it's getting confused. But if I say AZ dot and go into that namespace, console dot, and it's still confused. All right, that's cool. Normally it's because I'm inside the same resource group. That's why I'm trying to cart before the horse. But anyway, the point is you would have to do like an az.resource group if you do this name collision. Then the last thing that's really cool is this module. A module is like a sub deployment. So if you want to keep a separate file, like it's going to say, like for me, I personally stylistically like to have a module for each like type of object because I'm kind of object oriented. So like I'll have a web.bicep and a key vault.bicep because developers who thinks duplicate code is bad, generally speaking. Generally, okay. So if I have reusable code, probably okay. Modules. That's what modules are. So this is how I do a web app. It has a string for the name, environment. It's going to recommend an S1. Don't use S1. It's different. It's like the old one. It's just something I had. Maybe the capacity of 1. I'm going to set the resource group location. See, here's where it. Please work. There it goes. So it has strong objects like. And then this is saying it's a secure string. This adornment means these are kind of like attributes. Their way of doing attributes. It just means don't let this show up in the logs anywhere. I don't want this value sneaking out. And this is going to create a server farm. You know, it's just kind of repetitive stuff, honestly, in my mind. The location is the resource group location. I set a default up at the top. If you want to override it, you can. I don't care. And it's going to create a web app called a website, API versions. And actually, just to show you just how powerful this is, let's just say I'm gonna start typing web app. Oh, cool. And see these little templates right here? So like this web app, let's just use this one. I'm gonna tab complete. It just templated the whole thing for me. So just go ahead and fill it out. You're good to go. Or if maybe you don't know what you're looking for, you can say resource foo, and then now it's gonna try to help you out a little bit. I don't know. I'll try doing everything starts with Microsoft apparently. And I need quotes. I don't know. I'll just pick something random. Do that. Now it's going to try to it'll tell me what the API versions are available. So I didn't have to know that either. So now there's like an existing keyword and an equals keyword. I don't know. Oh, required properties. Cool. Like you don't really have to know too much about the templating. It really helps. It really holds your hand along the way with the IntelliSense, as long as you have the Azure Bicep extension installed, which is tracked in that GitHub thing with the links and all that stuff we talked about. And then you get cool things like tags, like foreshadowing. So what's happening here is just a template. I'm not trying to teach you how to like do Bicep from scratch right now. I'm just trying to show you kind of the lay of the land. But what Bicep does for you is it gives you these templates that allow you to control the infrastructure and make things idempotent. At which point, I'll throw a little PowerShell in here. Let's see here. Yeah, okay. So there's a README file that gives you this command. So don't try to read through this ugly command. It's right there in the README in the GitHub thing. So it'll be there waiting for you. But the only thing that's really neat is I'm going to throw a little what if there on the end. And that'll give us mostly what it thinks is going to happen. Ah, dang it, Jeff. Oh, boy. I logged everything else in. Might work. Jeff, I think Microsoft's IP address should be probably safe. So that's going to run out. It's going to do a what if and come back with what are the changes. While we're waiting for that, I do want to point out the good, bad, and the ugly. I don't know if you know about this one, Adam. Nested templates, modules, have been open since February 18th, 2021. Generated values are not showing up in the what if. They're working, but not in what if. So we're still kind of waiting on that one. Yeah. So if you want to do like a only deploy if what if comes back with some changes, don't count on it yet until that GitHub issue's closed. Yeah, that's been a pain in my side. Everyone thinks my custom extension I made doesn't work, but I'm like, no, it works. It's just, well, technically, it works how it should work. So then it kind of tells you what the diffs are. So the next thing to show with that is I'm going to pull up this. And so here's the Tech Talk resource group. And currently I only have a key vault in here. I was going to delete it, but they soft delete and it messes with your demos. So I'm just gonna go ahead and fire this up, take away the what if, fire that off, and we can come back and check on that in a minute. Think of cooking shows, you just kind of put it in the oven, walk off. So we talked about the modules and the repeated code is a problem, or you don't want to have a repeated code. This is where it becomes immensely powerful. This is probably the crux of this entire talk I'm about to give. And that is with Azure Container Registry, you can take your bicep templates and post them to a private repo that you can use single sign-on to then consume them across all teams. All teams. So if you think of that web app, that one web app I did, I can post it up similar to a Docker file and say, everyone get on web app v1. I only want you to give me a couple values. This is the only values you're allowed to tell me in the v1. So you'll see this is an alias. I'll show you how that works in a second. This is the name of my container registry. You're going to have a web app, and we want the version 1. Version 1, versioning is good because then you don't break when you add stuff. You make it version 2, and then they migrate. And even though this template is out on the web, it knows I need that. I got a red squiggly on line 14 immediately, put that back. But think about that. We have 25 teams all consuming the same web app template. I could probably inject, everyone must use TLS 1.2. I could probably inject your VNet. I could probably inject your App Insights, force logging. I can do cost allocation to make sure people are spending responsibly. I can say if you're in prod, you only get these 3 types of SKUs for your web apps. These are the scaling, scale out, scale in strategies we're going to be using. These are the approved strategies, best practices, because not everyone even knows them, to be honest. There's a couple people who have opinions on them, good for them. But most, they want you to tell them what to do. If you can just give them that and say, fill these 3 things out and it's going to be perfect, then now you've herded your 25 cats. This will give you that power. This is my favorite feature. I actually figured out how to do this in an ARM template back in 2018, and it got shot down because technology was not there. It's there now. So if you want to see what that's like, I did put in my GitHub, if you come to here, so there's a file called bicepconfig.json, which is in my root. And in that file, it has, think of it like editor config rules. So your linter options you can control for your bicep templates, but these module aliases. So you can, I use BR. So BR is the alias names. So this, if I were to say my registry, it would just point directly to this. But if I say HCSS templates, it goes to my registry, and then it has a relative path. So it starts me off already in that folder. Think of it as a shortcut, map drive, whatever works for you on that. And then I just reference the template directly. So that's how you'd get away with that. As far as authentication, you just reference the order of what you want it to try for your auth. So if you're more of an Azure CLI person, put that up top and then whatever. And it'll just use the same tokens everyone else is. Like it'll use your single sign-on to set all that stuff up.
Push to the AC.
Oh, yeah. So if you go to my handy dandy GitHub, oh shoot, that was it. So if you go to my handy dandy GitHub right here, there is going to be docs on this because it's a pretty extensive thing. But you go to here, it says how to create it. Here's a follow along. It'll create the registry, Azure CLI or PowerShell. Here's how you publish the files right there. So you just fire up, you get the template perfect, you push the command up, and this thing will walk you through. So if you have any questions about the things and you want to go deep dive into it, I tried to get ahead of that and put the deep dive right there with the follow along to the tech that we're talking through today.
It's cool. I didn't know it did that.
So you do this, but your developers also do this with their own things? They all use stuff.
So this is a new initiative we're pushing. So like I said, the story isn't complete yet, but I got buy-in from top management that we're going to start doing this, and everyone will consume the templates that the DevOps team hosts. However, I talked about that person who really has an opinion. They're really good. You don't have to use it. What we're planning on doing is creating an Azure policy that says, we expect everyone to do this with their web app. Now I monitor it. I notice 50% of the people are not there yet. Then I'm going to turn around and say, hey, but by the way, if you reference my template, all you have to do is give it 3 values and you'll be fixed. You won't have to deal with this. You can do it yourself. And you got to do it in 6 months or 3 months or 2 months. It has to happen. How you get there, I don't care. That's on you. But I have a way to do it in 2 lines of code. That's of value to you. You'll never have to think about it again. So that's where the value comes in. But yeah, it's similar to the whole Terraform question. I'm like, it's like eating your veggies. It's like, I don't care how you do it, just please do it. Like, if you're just doing it, that's the first step. So that's kind of the motivation behind that. That answers the question though? Cool. All right, so we got 30 minutes. Okay, cool. So that brings me into Azure policy. And I lost all my links because of authentication, but we can wing this. Azure policy, just a bunch of pie charts. We know what pie charts, or donut charts. It's just donut charts and rules and donut charts. I'll show you the rules. Imagine the donut chart. So here's just another deployed app. Oh, I fired off a deployment and I told you I was going to show you all that. So let me go do that real quick. So I fired off deployment. I'm pretty sure it's probably done. Or it's not. Or it aired out. Let's see. The Vulkan. That's not, it's old. Structure. Oh no, I know what's going on. Hold on, give me 2 seconds. You know what it is? I logged in again when I got logged out, and guess what? My context got reset.
Different subscription.
Yep.
Somewhere else.
Yeah.
Production.
No, it's probably some garbage. Yeah. Luckily, it filled out. Okay, so.
Right. This is how we know it's real. It's not, not a video that you're playing.
So we'll fire that off and we'll just come back to that. So this is the next thing we're going to talk about. So this is the same stuff. It's target scope subscription, nothing new there. Some environment stuff, quiz, load text from JSON. Only difference is I added a little message. Can't let you do that, Dave, because this policy is going to be a policy that's going to stop something. This creates the resource group, but we already done all that. Looks like it ran through. Let's see what happened. Oh wait, no, that's the same one. Oh, geez.
Name conflicts. Woo-hoo.
Yep. No, I already fixed all that, so that's fine. They're stealing my mouse focus. Okay. Okay. And no, that's the other work I was doing. Okay, so new deployment, what if? So it comes, yeah, that's good, that's right. Infrastructure, that looks right. All right, we'll see what that does. If it fails out, it's not the end of the world. It's really not that important to the demo. So how the Azure policy structure works, I find it to be has anyone written Azure policy before? Okay, if you don't look dead in the eyes when you respond to that, I don't believe you because it's atrocious. The language syntax is a lot of fun. So like this is a policy definition. You take a policy definition, which is the codified what the rule is. Then you have to pair it with a policy assignment because do I want to send it to a management group like we talked about before, or a subscription, or in my case, directly to a resource group? Then So it's a multi-layered lattice of sorts. So the quick breakdown is index means I'm targeting anything that can be tagged. Metadata is just some added info. So the policy rule is if all of or any of field tags James exists false. So far, it's super readable. The reason the any of is because it's meant to grow eventually and have more than one tag. And the all of is where you would come in and say something like, if it's a resource group, all of, it's a resource group. All right, but if any of these are missing, so it's like if you think in arrays, like I don't know if people are big on like, well, controller should always be enumerable, or I shouldn't have one controller that's got a single object versus a list object. I don't know. This is more list facing friendly, so that's what the motivation behind that was. But if that's found to be true, then modify. So the effect is where it gets really neat. You can audit, which is just, I just want to report. And that's usually a good way to start, so you don't screw stuff up. Modify means I want to make a change. And then there's deny, it's just flat out block them. That can be dangerous because you can do something like, if you don't have a tag, deny, and then someone has a SQL server with 400 databases and one database is missing a tag, but they try to change the SQL server, it's going to look at the child objects and go, ooh, no change. You're denied because one database is missing a tag. So careful, careful. Observe and report first. This role definition, this is just, you just got to go to the docs. But basically, this is a contributor role. That's not some GUID or some secret that I can't show people. That is the Microsoft. That's a contributor. And the operation is add or replace tags James. And it's going to go to the resource group at runtime. And this is where it gets weird. I had to write ARM template inside of a bicep because they haven't gotten that far yet. But resource group tags James, take it from the resource group. And actually, I bet you, even if this thing didn't go the way I thought it was going to, I could probably go here to tags. So the thing is it's going to replace the tags. So if I just say, oh, let's take this tag. So this is like the funny a-hole way to fix stuff, but it can also have real value. So like if I hit apply right now and I add a value for the tag James, it does have the tag, it does exist, it follows the rules, and I come back to tags, still there, right? But if I come here and delete it, we said you must have that rule per Azure policy. Reload. Can't let you do that, Dave. So, because the moment you make a change to it is when the policy is evaluated. So if it evaluates it as, so for me, it's kind of like nudging the cats in the right direction. You know, it's like, hey, make sure you have TLS 1.2. I'm not going to deny you from doing your work, but I'm just going to keep going. Eh. And they're going to go, wait, no, I'm going to down. Eh. And then either they get really upset and waste a bunch of time because it wasn't communicated to them, which that's the other thing you got to watch out for, or it's really awesome and everything just kind of works and no one realizes and no one's none the wiser that you did that behind the scenes. Test it. That's my official, test it out before you go through something like that. So having these policies are really neat because you can do things like that. Then this policy set definition, which again, I believe, yeah, that's up to GitHub. A policy set definition is also referred to as an initiative. It is simply a collection of policies. So if you have an initiative like, actually, we're kind of doing this now. We're basing on the well-architected framework. So we're going to have policies that target like cost optimization, and then that's the roll-up that would have all the policies below it. And then whatever we're targeting, those would be the overarching report. So it's like your dashboard gets built based on those policies. So that's what that is. And then I had to go into a module to do the assignment. I can't remember why, but I remember that that was a big problem. Something about scopes got kind of weird. So if I go into my module and go to my assignment, the assignment is where you take this definition and it actually is going to do something. And I gave it a system assigned identity. System assigned identity is just the Microsoft, hey, I know you're a computer, but you're getting Azure Active Directory single sign-on guest house kind of account. It's very secure because it's passwordless, and what I like about it. And then if you really are having fun, you can even write little love letters for non-compliance messages. So if you do a deny, this would be what pops up in the portal when it fails. So at least they know why it failed. Like, and apparently it supports little emoji type thing. So that's fun. So that's a policy. That's a policy definition set. It has three or more. Actually, there's like more. Actually, now that I think about it, effects. And how we're going about doing this is our strategy is create the policy, observe and report, create the bicep template that gets you there. Because the Azure policy only reports on stuff that ARM can see anyway, because it's scanning the ARM Azure Resource Manager APIs. Then we create the bicep template that can fix it as small as possible. And then once everyone is fixed, we flip it to enforce or modify or something that can then ensure. And the best part is you walk away and it just maintains itself. You never have to, like, unless you have to change a rule or reevaluate a rule. Other than that, it's not extra manpower to then man the line, you know, to guard the border or whatever. You just make sure you have a well set up list and you're good to go. Okay, this is probably the best part of the demo that I'm going to show y'all, because when I saw this, I was shocked. Adam, how long does it take to get feedback on if your Azure policy is going to work in real time?
Take a little while.
A little while. You hit run and you wait 40 minutes and it's wrong. You don't know why. You're sitting there like, is it done running or did it act? Is it not working? I don't know. So when I saw this, I was completely floored. So the Azure policy, nothing new here. It's just the Azure policy extension. And the resource thing, this resource policies and evaluation. I can go and find my resource here and save it to disk. Wait a second, that sounds like a mock. Then I can go to the policies and find my custom definition and save it to disk. That means it's a mock. I can probably change it. Interesting. Okay, so let's go here and find my resource tagging policy definition, which says you need to be a resource group. And we're trying to say you have an environment tag, a contact tag, and a product tag. Okay, now we're going to get the policy assignment that's actually out there that's not working, but I need to figure out why. And then you can even go and get the resource and download it. So let's go back over to the policy thing. Here's the policy PD policy definition. I'm going to check that. And there's my resource. I'm going to check that. Okay, so far so good. Only thing I'm missing is my policy assignment. It's a little funky. Like, see that? So I'm just missing my definition. There it is. Okay, and I'm going to hit run. And there you go, done. Compliant because it had environment. Well, that's a bug. I need 3 tags. And the reason it's a bug is because if I go back to my resource, come on, that's so much faster, right? Real time and why. Things that it never answered.
That's a feature of the extension policy.
Yes. Also covered in my GitHub at the front. But the problem here is that we have environment and product, but we don't have the contact. So with a little debugging, real world story, this is actually how it went down when I solved this. So I went to here, came back to here, let's see here. It's always tricky to get these things to roster on the evaluation, but if it can save me 40 minutes with a little bit of fumbling, I'm in. So I'm no longer interested in this tagging policy definition. I just want this policy assignment. And I want this, let's see here. See if I can get it to appear. Sometimes it just requires doing this. Ah, oh, hey-oh, okay. There it is. And the resource. And now let's fire it off again. And let's just bring this over. Not compliant. Because it passes the thing all of where it says it's got the it's a resource group, but it's missing the contact. And the fix that I applied, the reason it worked now is because all of, so it looked kind of weird before when I had all of any of, right? But if all of, it's a resource group, so that's true, all of, yes. And any of these tags are false, then that's not good. Not all of these are false. That's why I was short circuiting. So now I can debug it, get real-time feedback with marginal clicking around. I mean, it's got some work to do from a usability standpoint, but holy crap, I just saved 40 minutes. And yes, now it's usable. Now it's usable. That's what the part that's amazing for me is like, now I have something I can actually work with. And the best part is these resource files, they're all JSON. So you want to go into the resource and change something about it, go for it. You want to go into the policy definition, change something, go for it. One of the quirks I found is don't try to do it with policy initiatives. You want to have the individual components, kind of like unit tests. Like don't test the giant controller. Start off with the little bits, and then eventually, I mean, I'm not saying don't test a controller, but start off with the itty bitty bits, and then if they all come together correctly, then you would expect the bigger one to work, hopefully. So, does that save anybody any time? Is that what's up? So the dependencies for the Azure policy versus the resources out there.
Azure policy.
Mhm.
You're executing based on.
Mhm.
Evaluation. Any of the testing.
Yes.
They're on the schedule. Right. Active Directory being Azure Active Directory. Yeah. Of your change at the 10th level, taking back down. Next slide policy. And localize such that those things are not there. Then if it is, however, then you got.
Yeah, so I guess my answer to that would be when we do the testing, we always recommend, well, again, not Microsoft, I'm just me, I'm just a guy, but I always do it in audit mode for the longest time until I think I'm in a good place. And then and only then will I start to get more aggressive with the strategies. The other thing is that this looks at ARM and like Azure Active Directory, I think is Microsoft Graph. So I can't really do a lot of, not that I'm aware of, I don't have too much insight into that, into Azure Policy with Graph. Maybe IAM has a little bit of a hook, I think, at the resource group level. But with that said, when I get the unit test going, let's say we have an eventually consistent model, I'm just kind of, for me, when I write a policy, I say, if this thing were to eventually become consistent, how would I want it to act? And that's how I would write it, not if you're missing this, I'm angry. Like, if you make this change, what do I want to do? And I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's kind of how I like to think of it is when there's a decision, I want this to act on my behalf, not necessarily act as a band hammer that runs around messing everybody up or anything like that. The other thing I noticed was kind of weird, and maybe this is a limitation of my knowledge, or maybe it's a limitation of the tech stack, but it seems to evaluate every resource one at a time. So anything that's not the resource you're looking at that moment, out of scope. So like I tried to do something where I was like, if I'm a SQL database, but the SQL server had, no, you're at the database. We can evaluate right now, then you're done, move along. But so that was like one thing I saw that was kind of interesting about that. I don't know if there is a possibility to do that. I haven't found it yet. Yeah, maybe it'll come in time. But we got this really cool extension. I always try to leave everybody with like a really neat tool to look at. I think of this as kind of like, it's not really unit testing, but it's kind of like, it just gives you a faster feedback cycle. So you have the ability to work with that. So any questions about this part so far? We good?
Andrew had a question earlier that we didn't.
Oh, okay. What do you
Well, so he was asking, I think he's referring not to what you have here, but what you found previously with Bicep, I think. I'll read it out. So this is a kind of alternative to managing Azure policy. Locking down Bicep can only allow the deployments if they're based on templates. So he's guessing only allowing your pipeline to create resources or limiting the deployment templates in addition to that.
Yes, that is correct. So the ACR thing, we wanted to use approved templates. I don't know if we're gonna, our company, I don't think we're gonna lock it down to the point where that's all you can do. But the policy is gonna lock down the infrastructure, and then the hosted templates will make it a lot easier to onboard. With that said, you could definitely do something like that in your pipelines and say the only way to update Azure policy is through this pipeline. We don't trust any of our own people to do that. You can try to lock that down. Use some of the stuff that Jeff showed as far as like strategies for saying no one has access to this other than these few people, and then you set up a pipeline, and that's the way through.
I'll show an anecdote here. So this one's interesting because I've seen a lot of this at larger customers. You mentioned you might not be doing it yourselves, but you know, I've seen a lot of enterprise cloud journeys, many of which end up actually at the point you were describing and Andrew was saying, which is whereby particularly larger companies, the corporate IT do prevent folks from even touching the portal at all. So patterns like this are ones that we see implemented at scale. I mean, just across the board, all development teams, they have to use the defined templates that are approved by corporate IT, and they're not even allowed to create their own things. So that may or may not be the destination for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a destination we've seen for some enterprise customers for reasons of scale. Which I see working with a lot of enterprise customers, they will, of course, everyone wants the freedom to just create stuff in Azure and just do it all themselves until mistakes are made, and then it needs to be governed. Governing it in sort of the approach you were just showing, whereby this is the approved way to create whichever given resource. These are the limits we're going to put in these regions, and any resources other than this, yeah, you can't have those. Denied. Can't have it. You want it, you can't have it, or there's a process to go through. So, yeah, it's a destination for a lot of customers.
Yeah, what's interesting is the mindset we tried to have, though, is not how to block people from making bad decisions. It's how to help people make the right decisions the fastest way possible. Like, I don't want to block you from prod, from production, but I have a pipeline right here that'll do all of this for you, and it has absolute access as long as you follow best practices and go through the pipeline. You can create wherever you want. I don't care. Your whole team will approve the pull request, manager let it go through, pass the unit test. You're good. Go for it. Have fun. Now we're just trying to say these ones are like, a lot of people don't have time to sit around and think, man, maybe if I, instead of scaling my web app up to a really large P6 something, maybe if I just had P1, B2s and scaled out properly and scaled back in. Not everyone thinks that way. Like some. You know, they're called like principal developers and things like that. But you know, when you got a team of just, you know, like regular developers, maybe they don't know that. So why don't I just give it to them and have it signed off on, and everyone has already had a chance to look at it, and it has all those best practices baked into it, because it's not people don't want to do it. Like, I mean, how many times has someone like left off logging on their app because they just didn't have time, or left off retry back off policy, didn't have time. By the way, Poly is an amazing new package we haven't used. That's for C#. That's a good one for that.
Something this gives us too is once teams are adopting the ACR and all that kind of stuff, it's very easy for me to come in and update the firewall rules, update this, that, the other, add things, start ruling out too big machines, too small machines. And the next time the pipeline runs, it picks all that stuff up, and the developers never know what happened. But now the next log4j comes out. I don't have to go and harass all of them and get them to give me their negative attestation that log4j is a problem, because that's always, you know, math comes back in really quickly that you can't prove a negative, I can just go in and say, even if we have it, we're mitigating it this way until the proper fix is out.
Yeah, so I guess I have more stuff to show if people want to look at stuff, but I guess in closing, to kind of cap around the whole globalization strategy thing, is we had to find new ways to think things through and how to do things at scale and how to do things with, because a lot of this stuff, people were saying, oh, how many more people do you need on your team? I'm like, if I need a bunch of people on my team, I'm doing it wrong. Because when I have to go to the next country and the next country, eventually it's going to catch up to you and bite you. So we were trying to find ways to be leaner. And like my joke was, Jeff was the one actually who found Azure Front Door, and I told him like, yeah, I'd rather have like firewall networking security as a service rather than having you got Steve over here and he's supposed to know how to configure the network. I'm like, the firewall. I'm like, I'm sure he's really good at his basic IT job. I don't know if he can do this fancy firewall stuff, because there's like a whole team of engineers like at Microsoft versus Steve. Yeah, I'm gonna take that one every single time. I'll pay a little extra too. I don't even care, because I'd like to know that if something goes wrong, I can blame Microsoft. But it's aside from the little outages we've had, I think it has a lot of promise as a tool, because it'll actually we didn't cover this, but how it works is like a CDN. You have like the location that's closest to you to get the image. Well, this is like Tor CDN instead. Like you hit this closest thing and then you immediately hit Azure Dark Fiber and go straight to the thing. So it's actually faster than the public web. There's like some demos out there where they show it, because like if I'm in California but the website's East Coast, you hit the California pop, you're on dark fiber instead of public web going over to that website. So latency goes down like that. And because we're at East US like everybody else, and yet no hacker movie has ever tried to take down East US. But that would be like the most realistic hacker movie ever. You take that down, everyone's done.
Yeah. It took me and a Microsoft support tech and an engineer about a week to prove that out to the point where our management was really happy with it. Network traces and spinning up boxes along the way and doing some weird stuff, because once it gets into Microsoft's network, we have no insight into what it's doing. So explaining what it was doing in a way to show the value prop it's thrown in a black box, it disappears, and it's just faster than everything else. And they're like, well, in what conditions will it be slower? It's like, I haven't found one yet, and I don't know. And I've been hopping Tor nodes for the last 2 weeks. I don't know. So we actually got on with Microsoft, and that helped prove out how once it's in there, it just the internal DNS just makes it right there. It's awesome.
Question on the front door. So why this new shiny fancy standard tier instead of the classic? What are the features of the new one you needed?
Better UI.
To be fair, a big part of it was the UI was more intuitive for the dev team's adoption on it. I did all of our configuration in the stable,
The classic. Yeah.
We know from history that once something's got that classic and brackets after it, it's not long for this world. And once the POC and the various levels of approval went through, the other one was GA that had the classic behind its name, and we wanted it to move to the thing that was going to be around and not have to have another migration in a year.
It was a lot easier to onboard. Feature set, it had all the same features. It probably has more features, to be honest, but
Standard does, yeah.
But to be honest,
asking, but you're not using those.
we're not using those yet. We're waiting for it to get stable before we look into what else we can do with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, onboarding of a new endpoint was a lot easier.
Okay.
One of the drawbacks we found was that the health check probe is just pinging, but we have OAuth in front of everything. So if it pings and gets redirected, it's not happy. It's like, oh, that black hole is dead.
Yeah.
It's like, it's really not. So one way to mitigate that is like to put like an unauthenticated route on your website. It's like, hey, I'm still here kind of thing, but it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
That's the only way I found around it, because if you waste your time trying to get a token. Sorry, that's brush my daughter's teeth warning. Wife's handling that tonight. So yeah, you have to figure out how to get around those kind of things. But yeah, super useful in that case. And also the globalization rules are great, but for a V1 it's great because sometimes it rosters IP addresses in the wrong locations, so it's not perfect. So vNext, we would still have to have some sort of routing table at some point where you log in and we're like, Europe company, are you in Europe? Cool. But again, this was all proof of concept and trying it out, so it satisfied what we needed at the time.
So this. Finally, you create all this.
The one on the right, the Azure Bicep, yes. Yeah, and the VS Code's my editor. Yeah, so we use Azure DevOps pipelines to do everything, and this is the crux of one of the other problems ran through why I showed you all that bug. You don't want to blindly deploy infrastructure as code. For example, if your infrastructure as code has app settings in it, those app settings will, even if they're the same, will think it's a change, and it'll trigger a reboot on your web app. It goes, oh, you changed. If you hit save in the portal, it's like, I'm going to reboot your web app. And it's like, don't do that in prod. So we would start with, if it changed, then deploy or something along those lines. Or if you have a slot strategy, would probably the best way to do that with your web app slots. And that way you don't reboot the prod one. But we did like if something changed, then deploy. And then we found out it never thought anything changed because there's a bug. I was like, well, all right, just how about trigger the pipeline if this path changes? This is how we're doing it right now with the YAML. It's like, if anything, the infrastructure folder changes, then trigger the whole infrastructure scope thing until they fix that. And then we'll probably unify it back together and make it a single pipeline. But that's the workaround at the moment we're using. On top of that, strangely enough, there's not an Azure DevOps extension for deploying Azure Bicep files that I'm aware of, unless like someone made something cross-compatible, so I had to write my own, or you just make a Azure PowerShell script or an Azure Fly script and just put the command you would use on your desktop anyway, and you're good.
This is right next to your code.
Guys, so this can use this to change the connection.
Yeah. Even cooler. You know, I told you I had extra stuff. I wanted to close out the talk, but as far as now we're into the
Bonus round?
bonus round. Yeah.
Take some pizza.
Tell you what, let's officially close this out and then start the bonus round. I'm happy to stick around and answer all the questions. So I just want to say thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
All right, bonus round, answering your question. So the other thing I did in this template, but I kind of breezed past. What's really neat about this template is strongly typed. So I'm going to create a key vault, right? But then this one right here, so that's a deployment. That doesn't actually create it because it's a module. So the file that it calls is creating it. This is just the deployment. But then I go to key vault reference, and I say, hey, I want an existing resource. And when I do that, now this becomes a key vault object. And check this out. So yeah, now I can say key vault and say the reference, and I can say get secret, and that will go into my web app deployment, the secret, as a secured value. So if I check out my web app, that secured value right there, it's going to inject it into my connection strings from my key vault. And actually, when I created the key vault, I dynamically created a GUID, and I just stuck it in there, and I was like, I don't even want to know the password. So for example, SQL admin on a SQL data SQL server, you can give it as random GUID, don't even tell yourself it. Set yourself as the AAD admin, and no one ever has to know the password. Because
Another approach is with this particular solution is that web apps can read themselves directly from a keyboard. So you can actually put a reference to the secret.
yeah, I was just showing a couple different ways of doing that. This is just one. My personal preference is turn on the managed identity.
Yeah.
And you can go passwordless.
Yeah, but
Yeah, managed identity is the way to go. If you have key vault, full next level is managed identity, in my opinion, because then you don't have to like worry about out of step passwords and things like that. And then you don't have to worry about who has access to the key vault. It's just it either does or it doesn't have access. No passwords, no.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, we should probably wrap it up. Thank you, guys.
You are security guy.
Yes, yes.
I think this
Before it's coming and cleaning, I don't want to clean up. So.
is.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Been awesome. I've got my
Next month,
Thursday.
Did anyone
So I
learn
got
anything?
3 already.
Yeah.
Yeah. One more. And we got power platform.
Our platform, yeah, that's exactly. I think the security.
Oh,